Hey guys, Tom Kitterman here. Glad you're back. And we're going to be covering today the 5 questions that prove that Christianity is true. And we're going to be going over those 5 questions quickly. Then we're going to dig into the first question. So the 5 questions in order go like this. And of course, I want you guys to know this stuff cold. I want you to know these questions like you know the back of your hand. All right? So it goes in order. And if you follow through a conversation with someone and you follow through these 5 points, you're going to be making a very solid case, a believable case, why someone should trust that Jesus Christ is in fact the Lord of all creation, and why we can put our trust in Him for our salvation. So here's the first question. Number one, does truth exist? Now, this is a foundational question. There was a time that when you didn't need to ask this question of people, does truth exist? Or when nobody would challenge you on the notion of whether truth existed, everybody just kind of took it for granted. But because of the postmodern movement, especially in academia, there are a lot of people nowadays who doubt whether or not such a thing as truth exists. Well, this is a preposterous notion, as we're going to show you in just a couple of minutes. But the reason why we need to settle this question with our unbelieving friends is this. There's no point in trying to talk about the truths of God's existence if someone doesn't even just believe at the outset that such a thing is possible, that you can even make valid truth statements. So we got to kind of clear the decks here, make sure we've got good ground to stand on before we can proceed to our next question. After we answer the question, does truth exist? The next question that we want to answer is, does God exist? And what we're going to be talking about in these lessons is there are 3 major defenses, 3 major arguments that show that it is not only quite plausible, but probable that God exists. We'll be talking about those in the next couple of videos. So once we've established this question, does God exist? The next question that we have to answer is this: are miracles possible? It would really depend on whether or not God exists. But we have to answer that question before we can move on, because this is a stumbling block for a lot of people in their belief. Because the next question we're going to ask is this: is the Bible reliable? Now, if people say, and many often do, you can't trust the Bible because it records miracles and miracles are impossible, well, then you got a tough go of it on your hands. That's why we have to establish first, are miracles possible? Because once we get that hurdle out of the way, we can then talk realistically about this question of whether or not the Bible is historically a reliable document. And once we've answered that question, is the Bible reliable? Then we've got one more question that we need to ask and find a good answer for. And the question is this: is Jesus who He claimed to be? If indeed Jesus is who He claimed to be, then Christianity is true. We can trust it. We can trust the Bible. And that gives us a wonderful starting point to be able to share the gospel with someone, because now we can hopefully get rid of their preconceptions so that they can see the truth for what it really is. And speaking of truth, that gives us a good place to start our discussion of the first fundamental question: does truth exist? Well, the first thing we're going to want to know is this: what is truth? Well, there's a theory in philosophy called the correspondence theory, and it's very simple. It just basically says truth is that which corresponds to reality. That's pretty simple. Basically, the truth is what is real in the world. Now, in terms of making a truth claim, in other words, trying to establish something true, there are 2 kinds of statements that we can make about truth. One of them is objective truth statements. The other one is subjective truth statements or truth claims. What's the difference? Well, Objective truth, some folks like to call it absolute truth. Objective truth is independent of your mind. In other words, it's true no matter what you think about it, no matter whether or not you believe it, it is still true. Something like gravity would be a mind independent truth. Gravity exists whether you believe it or not. If you walk off the edge of the cliff, even if you don't believe in gravity, you're going to become a believer pretty quick. All right? It's independent of your mind. The second type of truth is subjective truth or mind dependent truth. And this is also known by the term relativism or relative truth. Relative truth is mind dependent. What really matters, what's really in play in relative truth is what you think about it. Really, a good way to think about relative truth is that it's an expression of your preferences. Now, for example, if I were to say to you, Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream is the best ice cream in the world, that would be a relative truth. It's dependent on my mind and what I think of that ice cream for its truth value. Now, you could make an objective statement and you could say Tom Kitterman believes Cherry Garcia ice cream is the best ice cream in the world. And because I do believe that, that's reality, that's really true. That would be an objective truth statement about my subjective belief. It's a little confusing, a little complicated. You'll probably get it on the replay. But anyways, let's get back to this question of whether or not there is such a thing as truth. Now, you're going to find people, mostly people who've been college educated, who are going to say, well, there's really no such thing as truth. Now, in order to disprove that statement, you don't have to prove that everything is true. You only have to prove that one thing is true. They're making the statement that there is no truth. Well, if you can find one thing that's true, that statement, that belief goes out the window. Here's one really easy place to start. Do you exist? Is that a true statement? Does that statement comport with reality? Now, somebody could deny the fact that they exist, but that's really an untenable position. They really don't have much ground to stand on. And if somebody were to say something like that to me, no, I don't think that I do, then I would say, well, then who's making the statement? It's kind of a non sequitur to say that you do not exist, because obviously you must exist in order to be making the statement. So that's one great way to prove that at least one true thing exists. If they say nothing exists outside of my mind, you could say, okay, well, your mind exists, and certainly that is true, so truth exists. Now, can you disprove that truth exists? Well, again, you can try, but you're not going to have an easy time of it. Take this, for example. Let's go back to the statement, there's no such thing as truth. Now, you're in conversation with somebody. What question do you want to ask them? You want to ask them, is that true? Now, follow me. They're saying that there's no such thing as truth. They want me to believe that. So they must believe that that statement is what? True. So the very statement, there's no such thing as truth, negates itself. Now, let's try another one. Let's say that somebody says to you, well, there's no such thing as an objective or an absolute truth. What question would you ask? Interesting. Is that objectively true? Or is it true only for you? Do you want me to believe it also? Okay. Once again, the statement negates itself. This is, by the way, what we call the suicide tactic. We kind of let the statement fall on its own sword. Here's something else that you might hear. Well, truth may exist, but we can never really know the truth. What question would you ask? Oh, that's interesting. Tell me something though. How do you know that that's true? Fair question, right? Again, the statement falls on its own sword, it commits suicide, it negates itself. Here's another one. You ought not judge other people. Oh, really? Huh. Excuse me, but isn't that a judgment? Once again, that statement defeats itself. Here's another thing that you might hear. All truth is relative. Okay, is that a relative truth or should it apply to everybody? You can use this tactic over and over and over again, no matter which way you look at this. You can never ever disprove the existence of truth. It is a bizarre notion, and it just simply is unworkable from a philosophical standpoint. Anybody who's ever thought about this and done serious work in the field of philosophy on this subject has pretty much come to the same conclusion. You can't argue against the existence of truth. You may not like it, but it hits you in the face no matter how hard you try to resist it. Now, it's sometimes hard to tell objective and subjective truth statements apart. For example, I could say, this room feels hot right now. Now, that's a subjective statement by me about the temperature of the room. It is mind dependent. Somebody else could walk in here and say, man, I'm freezing. Can't you turn up the heat in this joint? And that, by the way, happens every day at work and also at home with my wife. So that in itself, my statement that this room feels hot right now, that's a subjective statement. But again, you could make an objective statement about that, and you can say that on Sunday, June 30th at 7:02 p.m., Tom Kitterman believed the room he was in was hot. That statement is objectively true, even though you're making it about my subjective statement. A little hard to follow. Again, you might want to replay this video to get this all straightened out in your mind. So the last thing that I want to go over for this time around is this. It's the law of non-contradiction. Now, this is a philosophical principle on which we base our discussion of whether or not truth exists. And here's the law. Here's what it says. It says that, let's see if I can get this up for you here. Sorry about the black. Here we go. Okay, the law of non-contradiction says a thing and its opposite can't both be true at the same time in the same way. A thing and its opposite can't both be true at the same time in the same way. So, for example, I exist or I do not. That's the law of non-contradiction. If I exist, my non-existence can't be true. It's one or the other, and there's nothing in between. It's either A or non-A. That's the law of non-contradiction. They can't both be true at the same time in the same way. Here's another example. Truth exists or it does not. It's either A or non-A. It's either true or it's not true. There's nothing in between. By the way, the fact that there's nothing in between, that there's a name for that too. It's called the law of excluded middle. There's no middle ground there in two things that are contradictory. Here's another one. God exists or he does not. It's either A or non-A. It's either true or it's not true. There's nothing in between. Here's another one. Jesus is the Messiah promised to the Jews or he is not. They can't both be true. How about this? It is morally wrong to torture babies for fun, or it is not. Now, if this example is false, how do we protect ourselves? On what basis then would we be able to make laws, establish that people are criminals, and punish them for wrongdoing? Because if it's not objectively morally wrong to torture babies for fun, then what's the opposite of that? Or what's the counterbalance to that? Well, if it's not objectively true, then it's only subjectively true. That would make it just a matter of moral preference. And if so, who's to say that anybody's moral preference is better than anybody else's? If the answer is, well, that's what society has decided, well, that means it's still not objective because society could undecide, right? And that makes that statement that it is morally wrong to kill babies for fun, that if you don't believe that that is objectively true, then that becomes mind dependent, and it could be not true for someone else whose mind is set up differently. In fact, that kind of thing is exactly what happened in Nazi Germany. Torturing human beings to see what kind of medical information you could glean out of that was something the Nazis did on a regular basis. They did not believe that it was objectively wrong. They did not even believe that it was subjectively wrong. They just did it, and they felt no compunctions about doing it. So for them, that moral truth was mind dependent. So that's all we've got for this time, friends. Please do search these topics: objective truth, subjective truth, correspondence theory, relativism, and the law of non-contradiction. There are also some websites I'd like you to visit and start getting familiar with. They'll be posted in the comments on the video homepage. The websites are going to be str.org, cross-examined with d.org, coldcasechristianity.com, reasonablefaith.com, and reasons.org. That's all for this time. Next time we'll be talking about the second question in our 5-part series, Does God Exist? Thanks a lot. See you soon. Bye-bye.